Welcome to the third day of our conference, International Group for Lean Construction. It's a pleasure for me to start with this third day. We have a very important guest speaker that I'm going to introduce. Is Dr. Guilherme Tortorella. Guilherme is very well-known academic, but with a very interesting experience in the industry also. He's a senior lecturer at the University of Melbourne, but he has an experience working in many countries around the world, including originally his home country, Brazil. He has an interesting experience in developing research on lean in the manufacturing industry. And he's going to talk today about a topic which is a hot topic for our days, Industry 4.0, connecting Industry 4.0 with lean. I think we have to learn from the experience in manufacturing about how to do that, how to go about this connection, because we have a job to do in our industry, in construction. I have to say that Guilherme has been visiting us in our center in Chile, working with some of my colleagues who work with me in the Center of Excellence for Production Management in the Catholic University. And I know he's also very well known in the industry of the healthcare industry, how to introduce lean in the healthcare industry. So he has very interesting experience in manufacturing, in the healthcare industry, and I think he can illuminate also our own industry, construction. Guilherme, thank you very much for accepting this invitation. And thank you, because I know it's very late in Melbourne, where you are now. Now the stage is yours.
Okay, now it goes. Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. I'd like to say that it's an honor to be participating in the conference. I'd like to say thanks to Professor Alarcón and all the organization committee. That I know that IGLC is a very traditional conference, and I'm really pleased to be sharing a little bit of what we've been doing in terms of research in the past 5 years related to the topic, or related to the integration of Industry 4.0 technologies into lean, right? So I'm going to share my screen here. I think I need to get the permission from the host. Okay, good. There it goes. Okay, so what I'm going to talk to you today, again, is a little bit of the findings that we got over the last 5 years in our research related to the integration of Industry 4.0 into lean management, right? And once we started with this research, my background actually not only in industry but also in my PhD and the research that I've been doing so far, lean has always been a passion. I would say almost a religion for most of us. And as the emergence of new technologies from Industry 4.0 arose, this combination or this overlap, this integration between Industry 4.0 and lean production has generated much curiosity and also interest, not only in terms of research, but also in terms of practice, right? And this has generated the term, actually not generated the term lean automation, because this term has been created and proposed in the beginning of the 90s, but somehow it lost a little bit of relevance over the years, and with the emergence of Industry 4.0, this term came back again, and has become more prominent and so on. So we wanted to understand this relationship, and not only this relationship in developing countries, but also in developed economies, because we know that the socioeconomic context sometimes can play certain influence in this relationship, right? So that's the question, that's the motivation that we got in the beginning. So Lean, as you know, we have many principles and aspects that characterize Lean, such as open to experimentation, relentless reflection, waste elimination, and most of all, I would say human-centered and excels for simplicity, right? Once we move to Industry 4.0, Industry 4.0 is an approach that also has its own characteristics. It is based on a set of technologies, disruptive technologies, such as IoT, cloud computing, augmented reality, big data, and so on. And regarding the main features of Industry 5.0, we can talk about high-tech solutions, the IT infrastructure that is needed to support those solutions. We may also need a workforce with different skills, improved skills, high capital expenditure, especially because those new technologies, even though their cost has reduced over the years, they are still quite expensive, especially in emerging economies, right? So those are the main features that we have from Industry 4.0. And when we talk about combining Industry 4.0 with lean production or lean manufacturing, we can see this combination in two ways. We can see this from a negative perspective, from a conflicting perspective, because lean, on one hand, fosters creativity before investment, excels for simplicity. So we want to look for simple solutions, simple experiments, right? We are long-term oriented and human-centered. And on the other hand, we have Industry 4.0 with high capital expenditures that are needed to purchase those technologies. We need to develop new skills, and because we need to do high investments in those technologies, we need to provide payback, right, for those investments. Companies want to have payback. And in the case of emerging economies, in which the political and economic scenario changes a lot, varies a lot, companies want that those paybacks are occur in the short term, right? So I would say any investment that does not occur in, does not have a payback in 2 years in Brazil, for instance, it's not going to be attractive. So we are talking about this conflict between lean and Industry 4.0. However, if we look from another perspective, we may see certain synergy, such as lean, for instance, fosters process transparency. We also look for continuous improvement through problem solving. And lean promotes small batches in continuous flow, right? And in the same sense, Industry 4.0, whenever we are implementing sensing and communication technologies, we may have a faster identification of problems. We may facilitate monitoring and controlling of processes. And also Industry 4.0 technologies tend to allow modularity and flexibility in our process. So from this perspective, we see convergence between both approaches, right? So it was not clear to us if this combination between lean and Industry 4.0 was either synergistic or conflicting, right? And that generated the research questions that triggered our research a few years ago. So 3 main ones guided our research. What is the relationship between lean and Industry 4.0? 2, what is the effect of integrating Industry 4.0 into companies undergoing a lean implementation? And 3, how does this integration occur or differ between companies located in emerging and developed economies, right? So let's start with the first one and what we did for that. In 2016, the Brazilian National Confederation of Industry did this huge survey, I think with 2,200 companies in Brazil, manufacturing companies in Brazil, and they came out with a list of 11 technologies that are most likely to be adopted in manufacturers in Brazil, right? So those are the technologies that are displayed here. In terms of lean, you may know this study because this is a very famous study from Sharon Ward 2007, in which the authors propose 41 lean measures grouped into 10 operational constructs, right? So we had 10 digital technologies from the Industry 4.0 that are most likely to be adopted in Brazil, 41 measures of lean implementation from the study of Sharon Ward. And other than that, we gathered data based on 5 performance indicators, 5 operational performance indicators: productivity, delivery, inventory, workplace, safety, and quality. We chose those operational performance improvement indicators because sometimes if you move to financial indicators of a company, the financial indicators may be subject to the influence of external factors such as exchange rate, macroeconomics issues. So we chose to use those operational performance indicators as a proxy for the company performance, right? And then we surveyed 147 manufacturing companies in Brazil regarding their level of adoption of the Industry 4.0 technologies, the adoption level of the 41 lean practices from Sharon Ward, and the improvement level of those 5 performance indicators that I told you about. Respondents for this survey, they had to be experienced in lean, they had to be aware of Industry 4.0, and here in this table, you can see the sample characteristics. So we had a very well-balanced sample in terms of tiers, in terms of size, in terms of technological intensity, industry sectors, and so on. So this survey was pretty representative of the Brazilian context, right? We did 3 cluster analyses based on the responses. The first analysis was based on performance. So we clustered respondents into the ones that said that they improved a lot the performance of those indicators over the last 3 years, and the ones that said that those performance indicators did not improve that much in the last 5 years, in the last 3 years, sorry. The second cluster analysis was based on the lean production adoption level. So we had the ones that said that they are highly adopting lean and the ones that said that they are lowly adopting lean. And in the same sense, we clustered responses based on the adoption level of technologies. The ones that are highly adopting those technologies and the ones that are lowly adopting those technologies. And then we started cross-comparing the cluster analysis or the clusters, the groups, so that we could identify some trends in the data sets. So the first analysis we did, we used company size as a control measure, and we compared the level of technology adoption and lean adoption, right? So you can see that in the rows here, we have the technology adoption, and in the columns, we have the lean production adoption. What we could see from this frequency analysis is that first, we saw a similar trend on Industry 4.0 and lean, regardless of the company size. So in other words, companies that were small and medium or large, they presented a similar trend in terms of their frequencies. So you can see here that the number of respondents that said that they had low technology adoption and low lean production adoption is much higher than the ones that said that they have low technology adoption with lean, high lean adoption. And that behavior, that trend was also evidenced in the large companies. The other thing that we noticed is that we had a much higher or a significantly high frequency of companies that said that they had low lean adoption and low technology adoption, right? And on the other extreme, companies that had high lean production adoption, they also said that they had high technology adoption. So you can see that we start to identify a convergence in terms of the adoption level of technology in lean. Low lean production, low technology. High lean production, high technology adoption, right? And that was based on the company size. We did the same kind of analysis considering the time of lean production implementation. How long has the company been implementing lean, right? And we divided in less than 2 years of implementation and more than 2 years of implementation. When we analyzed companies with less than 2 years, we couldn't identify any difference that was statistically significant, right? But when we moved to companies that have been implementing lean for more than 2 years, we observed the same trend that we saw in the previous slide. In other words, the frequency of companies that said that are lowly implementing lean is much higher when they are also lowly adopting technologies. And the other extreme is also true. Companies that are highly adopting lean are also highly adopting technologies from Industry 4.0, right? So we again evidenced the same trend that we saw before. In the last analysis here, we did comparing the low performance improvement companies with the high performance improvement companies, right? So we consider the performance variation over the last 3 years as the control variable here. And once again, we saw the same kind of behavior, especially for the companies that said that they had highly improved their performance in the last 3 years. So in this case, whenever we had low lean production, we also evidenced companies with low technology adoption. And high lean production, high technology adoption. So these 3 analyses provided us evidence that things, or those 2 approaches, they grow, they increase and decrease together. So they may have this synergistic effect instead of a conflicting effect. That was the initial evidence that we got from this survey, right? But that was not it. We still had the other questions to answer. And the second question was, what was the effect of integrating lean into companies undergoing a lean implementation? So this question arose because since lean has been in the market, I mean, for almost 30 years, 40 years now, we understand that it's much more likely to identify companies in which lean is already there, lean is already segmented, and Industry 4.0 technologies are being incorporated into it, right? So we checked for the moderation of Industry 4.0 technologies on the relationship between lean and performance. So what was the moderating role that the Industry 4.0 technologies had in this relationship, right? And we used the same data set, we used the same companies, the same measures that we used before, the same 41 lean practices, the same 10 technologies, and the same 5 operational performance indicators, right? So regarding the lean adoption, we selected 3 main constructs, pull, flow, and low setup, out of those 10 from Shine Ward. And we checked their validity, right? We did an exploratory analysis to confirm that the performance indicators could be represented as one performance construct. So the variability of all those measures were consolidated into one performance construct. And in terms of Industry 4.0 technologies, those 10 technologies were divided into 2 constructs. One that comprised technologies that are mainly focused on manufacturing processes, right? and the other 5 technologies were grouped according to their focus on product and service development, right? So they are more related to these areas of the company. And then we did a series of linear regression analysis, and we came with this model here. As you can see, it's quite simplified here, in which one control variable was significant, 2 interaction terms were significant, 1 negative association, 2 independent variables, and 4 positive associations. So I'm gonna translate what we mean, or better explain what we mean by this regression model here. Just keep in mind a few things before I explain to you guys. We had almost all significant associations were positive, with except of 1 interaction between the construct of low setup and process-oriented technologies, right? Keep this result in mind so that we can move to the discussion. So the first thing that came from this analysis is that only the low setup construct presented a significant and direct positive association with performance. This was somewhat surprising because we were expecting that pull and flow also had a positive association, and we didn't verify that. And to explain this result, we had to look to the Brazilian context and see what are the characteristics of lean implementation in Brazil that could somehow explain this surprising result. So lean in Brazil is much less implemented than in developed economies, right? If we take a look in the history, I would say that lean outside the automotive industry in Brazil, maybe it started to be disseminated in the mid of 2000s, right? 2005, 2006, and so on. In the early 2000s, lean was pretty much in the automotive industry in Brazil, right? Of course, there are exceptions. Of course, there are companies with initiatives, but I'm talking in general, right? So I'm trying to generalize this outcome. Most companies still struggle with practices that provide stability, process stability, basic stability, right? So we're talking about setup practice, making sure that the setup is done in the expected time, that there is no variation, that people know how to do it, standardized work, and so on. So it's kind of expected to see that only low setup was the construct that had a significant association, because whenever we go to most of the companies in Brazil, if you find a company, or if you find many companies with a pull system, a really pull system implemented, I would say that this is very hard to find. So that's kind of common sense that we are still working on the basic stability in most Brazilian manufacturers. Another interesting result is that we found a direct effect of Industry 4.0 only for the process-related technologies. And again, this is somewhat explained by the Brazilian context, because Brazil is mainly a manufacturing country, right? We do not develop technology. We are not known by our expertise in developing new products, new technologies, and so on. Most of the companies, especially the ones that are multinational companies, most of them, they receive the product already developed from the headquarters, and they do some small adaptations, and the thing that we are good at is manufacturing. That's our focus, right? So somehow it's reasonable to see that the process-related technologies did have a positive effect on performance. And the product and service-related technologies, the effect was not as prominent as we expected. So this is kind of reasonable, right? The second thing is those process technologies that individually present a positive effect, whenever we interact them with low setup practices that also presented a positive effect, their interaction is negative, or their interaction results in negative effects on the performance improvement. And that was intriguing, I gotta say, because you see, we have process technologies positively affecting performance. We have low setup positively affecting performance. But whenever we mix them, we have a negative effect on performance. And again, we did some interviews with some leaders, manufacturing managers, and so on, to try to understand this a little bit better. And one thing that came to our findings is that maybe in Brazil, companies still do not understand the exact benefits of the technology adoptions. So we might say that there is still a misconception of what process technologies are, especially a confusion with automation level. In other words, whenever we talked about process technologies, manufacturing managers usually thought about putting more robots in their production line, putting more conveyors, putting more physical automation, right? And not the information automation that sometimes that's what Industry 4.0 brings for us, right? This kind of interconnectivity. So they assumed that higher levels of process automation might lead to more rigid layouts, because as you know, whenever we have a high automation, high automated line, doing setup, doing changeovers in this line is a nightmare, because we need to change every single machine, every single robot, every single conveyor, especially if you have a very diversified mix of products. This is going to be a nightmare in terms of changeover. So this misconception of the real benefit and focus of Industry 4.0 process-oriented technologies might have led to this negative interaction with low setup practice. So that's the explanation that we got out. On the other hand, we saw that the interaction between product and service-oriented technologies with flow practice resulted in a positive effect over performance improvement. And again, this somehow is quite expected, because product and service technologies, they probably facilitate the reduction of time to market, and they create more reliable flow of value. So technologies such as augmented reality, such as 3D printing, they're going to help us to do more assertive prototyping, more assertive sampling, so that we can try to anticipate manufacturing issues that if we didn't have those technologies, maybe those issues would arise only when manufacturing has already started. So whenever we have these technologies in place, we might anticipate those issues and avoid them in the manufacturing flow, which also is going to contribute to a more effective flow of material. And that's why the positive association with flow practice, right? So that we are supporting the problem-solving activities, enabling continuous flow. But again, all the explanation that we got for all these somewhat counterintuitive results, they were pretty much based on the contest, on the Brazilian contest, right? So we always use the Brazilian contest and the lean implementation and the focus of the manufacturing industry in Brazil as an argument for those results. So this led us to the third question, which is maybe the socioeconomic context is influencing this relationship, right? So we moved to this third question here, which is to understand how this integration differs between emerging and developed economies. And for that, I have this collaboration with researchers from Politecnico di Milano in Italy, and we did a similar survey in Italian manufacturers. especially the ones located in the north of Italy, which is the most industrialized region in Italy, such as the south and southeast in Brazil are the most industrialized regions in Brazil. The north of the Italian region is the most industrialized region. And we did this survey over there, and we compared the 147 answers from Brazil with the 102 answers from Italy, right? And Italy was used as the developed economy proxy, right? So you can see here the characteristics of the sample, either from Brazil or from Italy. You can see that there is quite a fairly well-balanced sample. And for that analysis, we did a cluster based on the level of Industry 4.0 and lean production. So in other words, we got those 10 technologies from Industry 4.0 and those 41 measures of lean production. So we combined them in 51 measures, and we did a cluster analysis to determine who were the respondents that said that they had high lean automation adoption, and this combination we are calling lean automation, right? So we identified the high lean automation ones and the low lean automation ones. And we analyzed them in terms of size, time of lean implementation, and technological intensity, right? And we also did a post-hoc analysis comparing the averages or the mean of the low lean automation in Brazil and the low lean automation in Italy, and the high lean automation in Brazil and the high lean automation in Italy. So in other words, we wanted to see if the guys that said that they have high lean automation in Brazil, are they equal to the ones that said that they have high lean automation in Italy? Because our initial assumption is that because Italy is a developed economy, the high in Italy would be much higher than the high ones in Brazil. And the low in Italy would be much higher than the low in Brazil as well. So that was our initial assumption. So in terms of characteristics of the clusters, you can see here that a few contextual characteristics were a little bit different between them. So in other words, the ones that the companies in Brazil that said that had high lean automation, they were mostly large-sized one, more experienced in lean production, and they belonged to high technology sectors. And the companies in Brazil that had low lean automation, they were usually less experienced in lean. Whenever we analyzed the sample in Italy, the companies that were from the high lean automation cluster, size was not an issue. So we didn't find any significant difference between large and small companies in the high lean automation cluster. But those companies were more experienced in lean. They belong to low technology sectors, which was somewhat surprising. And in terms of low lean automation companies, we didn't identify any prominent characteristics. So we didn't find any statistical evidence that those characteristics were actually different. When we compared the mean values for the adoption of each one of the 51 measures that composed those clusters, interestingly, the first comparison was between low lean automation in Brazil and low lean automation in Italy. Out of those 51 measures, only 8 of them were significantly different, right? And out of those 8, 6 of them are related, or 6 of them, Italy had a higher average, had a higher mean value, as expected. We expected that lean automation in Italy was much higher in Brazil because Italy is a developed economy. And the low lean automation in Italy is higher than the low lean automation in Brazil, especially for the measures that involve supply chain development or lean applied to the supply chain management, such as just-in-time delivery, developing suppliers, and involved customers, right? As you can see here. Only 2 measures the Brazilian companies had a higher mean value than the Italian ones. However, when we compared companies that said that had high lean automation in Brazil and high lean automation in Italy, out of those 51 measures, only 10 measures were significantly different, right? And out of those 10 measures, 6 of them, Brazilian companies had a higher mean value. And those 6 are all Industry 4.0 related. So you can see here that whenever you have this red sign here, that's because Brazil had a higher mean value. And those 6 measures are all related either to process-oriented technologies or product service technologies. The ones that Italy had a higher mean value was the ones related either to lean and just one related to augmented reality adoption in manufacturing. So that was a very interesting result because we expected to see Italian companies with a higher mean adoption in all measures, but it happens that whenever we are considering the high lean companies or high lean automation companies in Brazil, we are saying that those companies can be compared to Italian levels or to developed economy levels, regardless the context, right? So in summary, our findings here were, first, technological intensity appears to be present to present contrary effects. If you recall, I told you that in Brazil, the high lean automation ones were also high technology intensity, were also from high technology intensity sectors, and in Italy, they were from low technology intensity sectors. The differences between the Italian and the Brazilian context were not so prominent as expected because out of those 51 measures, only 8 and 10 were deferred between those contexts. So it was not as prominent, as extensive as we expected. In lean automation companies, Italian companies seem to be more extensively adopting lean, especially in supply chain related practices, right? However, when we move to high lean automation companies, it seems that Brazilian companies seems to be more extensively adopting Industry 4.0, especially in process-oriented technologies. In other words, we assume that from this analysis, companies in Brazil, even though they are located in an emerging economy, they're the ones that have high lean automation adoption, they can be compared to companies located in developed economies. So their level of operational excellence can be compared to companies located in developed economies, regardless the Brazilian context, right? Our findings until now, and I say until now because this research is still ongoing and we still have much to understand, much to do. And what we can say so far is, first, the isolated adoption of Industry 4.0 technologies do not lead to superior results. I think this is something that we saw in the beginning of the 90s when companies were starting to adopt ERP systems, SAP systems, CIM, computer integrated manufacturing, and so on. We went to those companies, and whenever we saw a company with a SAP, we also saw employees with their spreadsheets, parallel spreadsheets, just in case, or because they didn't trust the software, the SAP software, or because they had a similar control in their computers and so on. So what we are saying is that good technologies integrated into ill-structured processes will not succeed, right? And in that case, lean production or lean as a whole may provide this fundamental basis for Industry 4.0 adoption. So lean may foster more effective flows, process flows, material flows, information flow, whatever, so that we can build this basis on which Industry 4.0 can be integrated and maybe catalyze the results from Lean, and then overcome some traditional barriers that we know regarding Lean production or Lean implementation, right? In socioeconomic contexts, they may be taken into consideration for such integration, especially when we are considering contexts in which technologies are much more expensive or relatively more expensive, right, to buy or to purchase. So this must be considered for sure. The analogy that I usually use with my students, my PhD students and researchers and so on, is that I'm pretty sure you know the basketball player called Michael Jordan, right? He's one of the best basketball players of all times. And I can buy to my son Michael Jordan's t-shirt. I can buy to my son Michael Jordan's shorts. I can buy to my son Michael Jordan's tennis shoes. And guys, I'm pretty sure that although I love my son a lot, I'm pretty sure that my son is never gonna play like Michael Jordan. Because bringing this analogy to the organizational level, we cannot neglect the construction of a behavioral pattern. We cannot neglect the construction or the evolvement or the advances that we do in a process at a process level. This lapidation, this construction that companies do over the years is key to build this basis for Industry 4.0 technologies. So good technologies can help performance. Yes, they can help performance. But if they are put into ill-structured process, into not well-organized companies, into places where the workplace practices are not there, they're just going to be small, or they're just going to provide marginal benefits, right? They're not going to impact as we expected. So we need this combination of practices and technologies in a healthy and very productive way, so that we don't overlap each other, so that we don't trespass each other, and we build this combination organically in our organizations, right? Just to share with you the next steps of our research. So we need to still better understand the pairwise relationship between specific Lean practices and certain Industry 4.0 technologies, such as total productive management and IoT, or single minute exchange of die and 3D printing, or value stream mapping and big data. So these pairwise relationships may lead to different results or insightful findings. We're also looking to propose a framework for Lean automation implementation, identify whether the soft skills required for this integration are the same as the ones for Lean production, verify which barriers can emerge for this integration, and which barriers Industry 4.0 can help us to overcome regarding Lean implementation, and comprehend the transient nature of Lean automation over time, because this is quite recent, right? So we don't have a differently from Lean, where we used to look at Toyota as the reference. We don't have right now a worldwide accepted company that can be this lighthouse for Lean automation, right? So this is something that we still need to comprehend. Again, I'd just like to say thank you for this invitation. I'm pretty much honored to share our findings with you guys. Want to say thanks to Professor Alarcon once again, and to the organization committee of this conference. And I hope to have enlightened a little bit more this subject that is something that we all love and are passionate about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Guilherme. We will have some questions for the audience. We will open the audio so we can have live questions, and also you can use the chat. Maybe I want to use this position to ask one question that I think you should be able to answer, and it's my own question. You mentioned at the beginning that the people that work in Lean has a passion, and also it's like a religion sometimes.
Yeah.
You have to interview many people during your research. Have you found resistance to Industry 4.0 from the Lean community?
I wouldn't say resistance. I would just say skepticism.
Okay.
Right. I would say that, because people are, especially the Lean experts, they tend to think more in simpler ways, right? And sometimes they can see Industry 4.0 as an over sophistication of companies, right? So, yeah.
Okay. It's not that because I know that some people is against that. It said the Lean that shouldn't be leading with Industry 4.0. I thought it could be the case in your experience. We have a question.
Sorry, Alarcon. I just want to tell you a story that I think it's quite interesting, because in 2018, I did my sabbatical in USA, in University of Tennessee, and I did some works with the company called Denso, right? And I'm not sure if you guys know Denso. Denso is a son of Toyota, right? Because Denso used to be part of the Toyota Corporation, and a few years ago, Denso started to be independent from Toyota. And I was walking the shop floor with the manufacturing manager, so a very high position in the company. And he was telling me and presenting to me all the practices and workplace organization that they had, very proudly. And all of a sudden I asked him, hey, what about Industry 4.0? And he said, I don't know what you're talking about. And then I said, okay, maybe it's a different term here, because Industry 4.0 is more a European term, right? Let's use maybe smart manufacturing. And then he said, oh, I'm not sure what you're talking about. And then I asked him, what about advanced manufacturing? And he said, no, I'm not sure what you're talking about. And then I gave up. But we continued the visit, right? And all of a sudden, he started to explain to me, oh, you see, here we have the Kanban system, we have these QR codes, they go to the cloud, and then we do the scheduling automatically, and then this information goes to ship. He said, man, this is Industry 4.0. How come you said you don't know it? Oh, this is it? So we consider that normal. That's pretty day-to-day for us. So, it was quite interesting.
Very interesting story. Thank you. Clarissa, would you like to ask your question live, or you want me to read it?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So thanks, Guilherme, for your presentation. It was really interesting. And sorry, there's a truck close to my house here. So I was wondering if you could tell us more about the characteristics of the manufacturers in your study, the Brazilian ones and the Italian ones, because I know that there are quite a lot of family business in Italy, so I don't know, even this small companies and the small manufacturers, are they open to implement new strategies, new I don't know, items from the Industry 4.0. And also, I didn't understand why Lean automation. Why don't you call just Lean 4.0? Because I think automation always reminds me robotics and things like that, similar. Like so. Yeah, that's my question, and thank you.
Okay, so thanks for the question. Regarding the first question, you're right. Almost 62% of the Italian sample was from small and medium companies, right? So we did have this unbalance in terms of company size. And however, the other characteristics were a little bit more well balanced. And as I told you, there was one characteristic that we found a very awkward result, because the high lean automation companies in Italy, they were mostly from low technology sectors. And in Brazil, it was the opposite. It was from the high technology sectors, which is kind of obvious, right? It's kind of expected. But in Italy, they were from low technology sectors. In this classification, high technology and low technology sectors comes from the OECD classification based on the industry sector that you belong. So it's not something that we invented, right? So this is something underexplored in our study. I agree with you that we still need to go a little bit deeper, because in Brazil, I had the chance to interview managers after the survey, but in Italy, I didn't have this same chance. So this is something, this is a very good question, and I think we still need to go a little bit deeper in that. Regarding the term lean automation, we framed our research on a few authors that started with it, whenever talking about the combination between Industry 4.0 and Lean. For instance, Kohlberg has, I think, 2 or 3 publications in which he and his co-authors refer to lean automation, and they refer to it as a renaissance of the term that was first introduced in the 90s, right? So if we say Lean 4.0, we may assume that there is Lean 3.0, Lean 2.0, and Lean 1.0. And academically speaking, I've never seen any evidence of it. So we decided to go with the term Lean automation, which is something that has already been developed in the 90s, and maybe it's being triggered again, once again, now with the emergence of Industry 4.0.
Don't worry, Guilherme. We already are using the lean construction 4.0 term in this conference.
Great.
We have a question from Carlos Formoso. Carlos?
Hello, Guilherme. How are you? Nice to see you again. Thanks for the presentation. You mentioned something very important at the beginning, which is Lean and Industry 4.0 have synergies, but also have conflicts. So I wonder if you have explored in your studies a new vision for Lean in the future, the managerial system that is going to support Industry 4.0. I wonder if there are some changes in principles, concepts, additional concepts or principles. Some of them will become less important or more important. It would be nice to have your view on that.
Well, it's good to see you again, Formoso. It's very nice to see you, at least virtually, right? Thanks for your question. We did have continued our research on this topic, and I'm going to give you some examples of things that we found out in those in those studies, right? One of them, which is already published in IJPR, approaches the value stream mapping, for instance, this lean practice in the 4th industrial revolution. And one of the things that we found out is that maybe designing lean value streams in the 4th industrial revolution, a few guidelines for this lean value stream might change. If you recall the guidelines from the book of Roder and Shook, right? One of them, for instance, is that we must have a 1-point scheduling, right? So we must try to make flow so consistent and so well organized that we may have only one point for scheduling, and from that point on, the flow manages itself, right? Either through pool systems or FIFO lanes or so. Regarding lean value streams in the Industry 4.0 context, whenever we have technologies such as big data, Internet of Things, and cloud computing, maybe scheduling just one point is underestimating the potential that we have, right? So we may explore, for instance, multiple scheduling points in lean value streams, which is kind of contrary to what Roder and Shook said in the early 2000s when they provided these guidelines. Another finding that we got is that, for instance, the concept of operational excellence before and after the emergence of Industry 5.0, right? Before Industry 5.0, most of the experts that we interviewed, they said that operational excellence was pretty much based on human behaviors, right? Engaging people so that their behaviors are consistent with the process that we want to develop, right? So that was a consensus. Whenever we are talking about operational excellence in the fourth industrial revolution, the experts that we interviewed, and this research was also published in IJPR last year, most of the experts said, okay, we still rely on people, but now the thing is making people understand the data so that their behaviors are supported by the data that we collect. So there is kind of a slightly change on the focus of this aspect in the operational excellence in the fourth industrial revolution. Of course, this is a topic for a huge discussion, but those are the initial findings that we got from the continuation of this research. So just to give you a few examples.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Guilherme. We have a question from Karim and then Diana. Karim?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you for this insightful presentation. I just want to build up on several things you touched based on and even people ask about. And as you mentioned, that lean is heavily human-centered, while a lot of the emerging disruptive technologies tend to overshadow the human element. And as you mentioned now, just like a couple of seconds ago, and I'm tackling especially the point of decision-making, where decisions become more data-driven rather than relying on the emotional aspect of the person or the specifically emotional intelligence of the person. So based on the several interviews you made, the several visits and your research, what do you think is the impact of shifting to Industry 4.0 on the human factor, especially in decision-making?
I think well, thanks for your question, Karim. I think that's a very important question that we must ask. Again, it's all about how we manage this Industry 4.0 advent, right? In theory, the idea is that the information is going to be more transparent, more democratic. So in that sense, this kind of converges to the principles of lean, right? In which we want to have visual management. We want everybody to know what's going on, and you don't need to be the leader or the manager of the area to know the information. Everybody can have access to this information, and everybody can react to this information. However, there is the risk of collecting data, having the information on your hands, but still presenting the same old behaviors. Let me give you an example of one PhD student that I had in Brazil. He used to work for an automotive industry in Brazil, a large company in Brazil. And in one of our meetings, he was really proud that his company was implementing Industry 4.0, right? And he showed to me that he could have access to all machines of the shop floor on his smartphone. So he had the access to see the status of all machines of the shop floor on his smartphone. And he showed me. And whenever he showed that, I saw, okay, Daniel was his name, right? And I said, Daniel, that's very nice, man. Congratulations. But I can see in your smartphone that out of those 100 points over there, more than half of them are red, which meant that the machines were stopped, right? Those points are red. What are you going to do? And then he asked it to me and said, what do you mean? Okay, you're showing to me that in your smartphone, you have access to all this information. You know what's going on in your factory. You can see that half of the factory is stopped right now. What are you going to do? And then he said, hey, I'm not going to do anything. This is just to show you that we have the access to this information. I said, okay, man, so what's the point? Just like in Lean, we say, if you're not going to use it, do not collect it, right? If you're not going to use the information, do not collect the information. That's the same kind of risk that we can have in Industry 4.0, because we are going to have this large amount of data. But if we still manage processes in the same way that we used to do, what's the point?
Thank you, Doctor.
I think you're muted. Yeah. Alarcón, you're muted.
We have time for two more questions only, and I expect that the questions are short and also have a brief answer. Diana and then Sophia.
Thank you, Alarcón. Thank you very much, Guilherme, for your presentation, very inspiring. It's always very good to see data from Brazil and all this information. I have a question. I'm not sure if you have investigating that about performance measurement. I noticed in your work that you mentioned 5 metrics. That's quite conventional: quality, safety, productivity, and things like that. But I would like to know if, in your experience, in your work, have you noticed any different type of measures that these companies from the Industry 4.0, they are using for measuring their performance in a more systematic way, in a more considering these different technology that they are embedding in their process?
Thanks for the question. Honestly speaking, I didn't investigate that. So what I know is just a few initiatives, such as companies are measuring time to market or the impact on product development from the integration of those technologies. But those are all secondary or even tertiary indicators. They are not primary operational indicators. So they are just indicators that they manage, they collect it, but sometimes they don't even report it as a primary lead indicator. So maybe that's a very good opportunity for us to develop our research on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sophia?
Hi there. Thanks so much, Dr. Alarcón. Guilherme, just to thank you again for your presentation, calling from Texas. One of the things that I've always been aspiring to in Lean is this concept of flow that we see, the line of balance. And so it seems to me that automation or robotics are perfectly suited to this on the construction site, because currently one of our big sticking points is we have human beings who obviously have to go home and rest, and they have to eat and sleep and mobilize and demobilize. And that's created a lot of tension on job sites because they want to obviously throw up their work very quickly, even if in reality we have to ask them to hold back. If a drywaller and a HVAC want to throw up their work very quickly, obviously means that they'll have to go home and come back and go home and come back if we want to modulate it. So I actually don't see the conflict between the two. And I was just curious. I mean, I actually think that robotics and automation solve one of the struggles we have, because it is actually has come from a lot from manufacturing. So I was just curious if that's sort of your perception as well, or you know, obviously the culture of lean helps enable this because it's very collaborative, but the goal itself seems to be very well suited.
Well, thanks for the question. I think I agree with you. I really don't, especially based on our findings, right? I don't see this conflict. However, I do know that sometimes companies tend to look for short-term solutions, and they try to neglect the importance of this behavioral process, this construction of this process, and try to find short-term solutions and get results. And in that sense, I believe that this can be problematic. This can cause some issues with the lean implementation, because you're going to insert very disruptive technologies into processes that were not well established or were not well designed. So in that sense, I see a conflict. But again, our findings indicate that lean in Industry 5.0, if well managed, we can raise novel or even superior results, either in manufacturing or construction.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Guilherme, for your presentation. I think it's a very good topic for the future. It's the future we are living now, also the present and the future. And thank you for staying with us at this time of the day in your country. And I hope we will see in person again soon. Okay?
Yeah, for sure. It was my pleasure. Thank you very much again for the invitation. Congratulations on the conference, and thank you very much.
Thank you. And we are closing this session now.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.